Hello and welcome to the Witch's Den. I'm very glad that you decided to come in today. Spellcasting can be a very stressful profession, so it's good that you've come in to get some help and, just kind of delve into what might be bothering you and causing the most stress for you. It's good to get right to the root of these problems. What is your full name, just so I can have it for my ledger? Okay. And how long have you officially been a practicing witch? Okay, so you have a few years' experience then. What are some of your favorite spells? Okay. And so why have you come in today? What's been bothering you the most? You always get a little down around Halloween. Okay, and why is that, considering this is, our holiday? Most witches find it very joyous. What is it about Halloween that gets you down a little bit? You're not invited to many of the fun Halloween gatherings occurring. Okay, yeah, that can be really hard to deal with. Being a witch alone on Halloween can be very depressing. Do you ever take the initiative to try and invite others out? Or, go to some public witch gatherings to try and, make some new friends and meet some new people? You haven't done that yet? You're just hoping some of your friends will invite you out? Okay, well, yeah, I would suggest that you do. There's a lot of public witch gatherings this time of year. Off the top of my head, there's the Midnight Flight Club. They take regular flights around the world on their brooms. That might be something you're interested in. There's also spell dueling. There's quite a few spell dueling clubs in the area, and there's a lot of people your age there, so you might find that place where you could make a lot of friends. What the spell dueling clubs are is, everyone just kind of gathers and you practice shooting non-harmful spells at one another, just to kind of hone your skills and, get to know everyone. And, there's usually some food and refreshments afterward. I highly recommend the mummy scorpion pie. It's quite delicious. And then, of course, there's just mingling after the spell casting, which is a really good way to know people. It's even better than the flight clubs, because when you're flying, you don't have quite as much opportunity to talk to everyone. The wind's whistling in your ears and you're trying to keep your hat from falling off your head, and it's a little harder to make friends that way, though, of course, after the flight there is a little bit of mingling as well, so those are a couple options. Another thing you might want to consider is going to one of the cauldron shows. Those are really fun because witches from all over the country gather and they bring out their cauldrons, and we're not talking like your average cauldron that you can go down and buy at the store today. We're talking these are all like retro cauldrons that have been fully restored. There's some really old ones from the 1800s and the turn of the century, and they've been painstakingly restored, and a lot of them are painted up with fun designs on them, and it's just a really fun atmosphere. If you've never been to a cauldron show, that's a really great way to meet people. And if nothing else, it's a great way to see a bunch of fully restored cauldrons. So, it's one of the few places you can see those. Occasionally you meet a witch who brings one out, but, when you go to a cauldron show, you really get to see cauldrons from all the different eras and all the different types of cauldrons, really looking their best. And then, of course, there are, the experimental witches who have kind of built their own cauldrons. They'll start with like a classic cauldron base, and then they'll kind of build it out to be their own unique type of cauldron, sometimes merging two types of classic cauldrons. And it's really a fun event to go to if you've never been to one of those. Another thing you might want to check out is, I think it's this weekend, there is the Witches Familiar exhibit, where they'll be displaying, all the different kinds of animals that witches are commonly known to keep. So, there'll be many different types of exotic cats and owls and frogs and, all sorts of things. And it's usually a good crowd of people who, of course, being witches, will share many of the common things that you are interested in, share many of your common interests. And so those are always a fun way to meet fellow witches and perhaps get an invite to a Halloween party this year. Is it just the fact that you're not invited anywhere, or are there other things that sort of depress you about Halloween? You feel like you're letting your ancestors down because you're not the witch that you could be? Okay, would you say that that's because you don't try, or because you're simply not capable? Okay, so you could try a little harder then. What do you feel prevents you from, really putting in that effort to become a better witch? When you were a child, there were some very high expectations placed on you. Yeah, that can be really hard to deal with. Sometimes when the expectations on us are too high as children, when we turn into full-grown adult witches, perfecting those spells can just seem like work, because as children it really was work. If you had that overbearing, crazy aunt witch who just wanted you to, make sure that every spell was perfect. As a 10-year-old witch, it's a lot of pressure to put on a young witch, and, when it follows you into adulthood, it can be difficult. But the thing to remember now is that you are your own witch. There is no one standing over you right now telling you that you need to have perfect spells. You can do the spells as well as you can, and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks of your work, as long as your spells are good enough for you. If you can snap your fingers and have dinner ready, it doesn't matter whether it's worthy of a 5-star restaurant, as long as it's working for you. So you really want to look inside yourself and please yourself. As far as letting down your ancestors, do you think that maybe you're putting them on a pedestal? Obviously, you probably didn't know your ancestors beyond, maybe your great-great-great-grandmother, depending how long the witches live in your family. Different longevity potions work better for different families. So, but, as a guess, did you know anyone beyond your great-great-great-grandmother? Oh, you knew your great-great-great-great-grandmother. Okay, so you do have a little bit of a longer history of living ancestors, but good example is your great-great-great-great-grandmother. Is she still alive? She passed on a few years ago? Okay, but so you obviously had quite a few years of living with her, but being your great-great-great-great-grandmother, I'm guessing she was probably very up there in years, right? So she had a lot more time than you did to perfect her spells. When she was your age, it's quite likely that she did not have perfect spells either, so you may be putting a lot of undue pressure on yourself, comparing yourself to someone who's had several hundred years to practice, and you've only had several decades to practice. So comparing yourself with someone who's had hundreds of years to practice is kind of setting yourself up for failure. So you really don't want to play the comparison game, especially when you're comparing yourself to someone who's had so much more time to become adept. Because when you're the same age as your great-great-great-great-grandmother, I'm sure that all of your spells are going to be perfect. By that time, even trying a new spell will probably be no problem for you. So it's really not something that you want to be depressed about, you know? Okay, so for a little recap, I think you should get out and try a few new things to meet some people, and maybe put in a little more effort into your spells, not worrying whether they're perfect. Just give yourself a little more time to practice, and don't compare yourself to witches who had a lot longer to practice than you did. And as far as your older ancestors, perhaps the ones that you never met, you don't really know that much about them. I trust that all you've heard is, stories passed down, because if you haven't actually met them, then all you've heard are stories passed down from living relatives. And when we're speaking of someone who's passed on, we generally tend to only focus on the really positive aspects of that person, unless it's like, a funny little anecdote that's slightly negative, but generally focus more on the positive aspects. So your ancestral witches may not be quite as adept at spell casting as you've been told. Not to say that they're not capable, but people are probably telling stories about what wonderful witches they are, and only talking about the times that they got it right. They may not be passing down the stories of that time that they accidentally burned down the barn when their fire spell went awry, So you really want to take the stories of perfection about your previous ancestors with a grain of sugar, since witches, of course, don't use salt. So take it with a grain of sugar, and, just remember that they might not have been as perfect as the stories make them out to be. Thousands of years from now, when your descendants are telling stories about you, they're probably only going to talk about the best spells that you did. They're probably going to leave out the mistakes that you feel you're currently making. So no witch is perfect, so everyone does have a learning curve where they don't quite get it right a few times. So something to remember: you don't need to feel inferior. So how are you feeling now? A little bit better? Okay. Do you think you're ready to go out and meet some people this weekend, perhaps? You're not sure because you do have a little bit of social anxiety? Okay, yeah, that can make it a little bit harder to meet people. Fortunately, as witches, we do have a cure for that. While humans have to, rely on pharmaceutical substances, witches, of course, can just wave our magic wands. So before you leave, I will give you a spell that you can take home and perform, which should boost your confidence for the weekend, and that way you can get out there and start meeting people. And another benefit about meeting people is when you get a group of friends together, you can do a little spell casting, and it'll really be a joy. It'll feel fun to perfect those spells with a group of friends, as opposed to putting pressure on yourself to do it alone. So that will kind of check off the box for your second worry there, that some of your spells aren't quite up to par. So I think getting out there and meeting some people will really help you quite a bit, because you won't feel so lonely at Halloween if you're out with a group of fellow witches, running around scaring all the humans on Halloween night, and practicing your spells with your newfound friends. So that'll really be good for you, I think, to just get out there to some of these events. Again, the Cauldron show is this weekend, and if you've never been to one, I highly recommend it. And then, of course, if you want a regular event, I would suggest joining the Spell Club or Broom Flying Club. So, why don't I give you that spell, and you can take that home, perform that, and then get out there this weekend and start meeting some fellow witches, and then I wish you a very, very happy upcoming Halloween, okay? Alright. Glad that we had this conversation.